Hi, first grade. Welcome back to reading. Today we're going to be reading another version of Little Red Riding Hood called Pretty Salma, a Little Red Riding Hood story from Africa by Nikki Daly. So this is a slightly different version. I hope you like it. Then we're going to be making another tree in the Red Riding Hood forest. All right, so this one already has a different setting. It takes place in Africa, and you'll also see that there's a little bit of a twist on what we're used to in the story. Here we go. Salma lived with her granny and grandfather on the quiet side of town. One day, her granny said, "Salma, pretty Salma, please go to market for your old granny who loves you so." Salma put on her blue scarf, her stripy natama, her pretty white beads, and her yellow sandals. She tucked Granny's shopping list in her natama, lifted Granny's big straw basket onto her head, and kissed Granny goodbye. "Straight there and back again," said Granny, "and don't talk to strangers, you hear?" "Okay, I promise," said Salma. Off went Salma, flip, flop, in her yellow sandals. As she walked, she sang her favorite song. "Oh, Salma, pretty Salma, come kiss Granny, your darling old Granny who loves you so." At the market, she bought a giant watermelon, a speckled rooster, an ice-cold pink drink, and a bunch of candy-striped straws. The sun was growing hot and the basket felt very heavy, so Salma decided to take a shortcut home through the wild side of town. Along the way, she sang her favorite song. "Oh, Salma, pretty Salma, come kiss Granny, your darling old Granny who loves you so." Ooh, look. Oh. "Are you pretty Salma?" asked a stranger. It was Mr. Dog. He had been listening to her song. "Yes," said Salma. "Are you going to Granny's?" asked Mr. Dog. "Yes," said Salma. "Well, your basket is much too heavy for such a pretty little head," said Mr. Dog. "Allow me to carry it for you." Salma did feel a bit dizzy from the heat, so she agreed to let Mr. Dog carry her basket. After a while, Mr. Dog asked, "Oh, what are you wearing on your feet?" "Sandals," replied pretty Salma. "They must be making your little feet very hot," he said. "Why don't I wear them for you?" So they stopped, and Mr. Dog slipped his big feet into Salma's sandals. On they went, floppity flip, flippity flop. After a while, Mr. Dog asked, "What's that wrap you're wearing?" "My natama," replied Salma. "I bet you'd feel cooler without it. I'd be happy to wear it for you." No sooner had Mr. Dog wrapped Salma's natama around himself than he asked for her scarf and pretty beads. "How do I look?" asked Mr. Dog, striking a pose. Mr. Dog strutted along the road in high style. Salma began to miss her things, but when she asked for them back, Mr. Dog only said, "Some music will help us beat the heat. Won't you teach me a song?" So Salma tried to teach him her favorite song. "Oh, Salma, pretty Salma, come kiss Granny, your darling old Granny who loves you so." But Mr. Dog was hopeless at singing. All he could do was go, "Woof, woof, woof." "I need a lot more practice," said Mr. Dog. "And until I learn to sing, you won't get your things back." Salma begged, Salma pleaded, Mr. Dog, please give me my things back." Mr. Dog growled, "Shh, you will never, ever get your things back. Now run away, little girl, before I bite you in two." Poor Salma got such a fright when she saw his sharp teeth that she ran and ran and ran until she found her grandfather dressed in his Anansi costume telling stories. We've read the Anansi story. How cool. Looks like he's telling the story to the other children. When grandfather heard Salma's story, he said, "That's a very exciting story, Salma, but it doesn't sound like a happy ending. How can we save Granny?" "I know," said Salma. "We'll scare Mr. Dog." "Exactly how will we scare Mr. Dog?" asked grandfather. "Like this," said Salma, putting on the mask of Kakamotobi, the boogeyman. Salma picked up Anansi's atumpan and beat it loudly. "Gyoma, gyoma." Grandfather picked up his rattles and gave them a fierce shake. "Shuka, shuka." Little Abu Bakar, who loved a good scare, joined in with clapping sticks. "Katak, attack." "Let's go," said Salma. Meanwhile, when Granny saw Mr. Dog flip-flopping up the path, she thought it was her pretty Salma. "Salma, pretty Salma, come give your Granny who loves you a kiss." cried Granny. Mr. Dog leapt up and gave her a sloppy kiss. Oh, my Salma, said Granny, what a wet nose you have. Granny took the heavy basket from Mr. Dog and said, Salma, pretty Salma, you look hungry. Let's eat. Mr. Dog started to chase the speckled rooster round and round. Oh, my Salma, said Granny, what an appetite you have. Then Granny said, Salma, pretty Salma, it's time for your bath. Into the bath leapt Mr. Dog. Oh, my Salma, said Granny, what hairy ears you have. Are you sure you are my pretty Salma? Oh, yes, yes, cried Mr. Dog, jumping onto Granny's lap and wagging his tail. Now Granny was really worried. Did her pretty Salma have a tail? Perhaps this wasn't her pretty Salma. And look up here, they're coming closer. Well, there was only one way to find out. Let's sing our favorite song, said Granny, and she started to sing. Oh, Salma, pretty Salma, come kiss Granny, your darling old Granny who loves you so. Woof, 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 barked the dog. Then Granny knew she had been tricked. She reached for her broom. Out, get out! But Mr. Dog liked being pretty Salma far too much to leave Granny's house, so instead he growled and snapped at her. Granny was afraid Mr. Dog would bite her in two, so she jumped into her cooking pot. Oh no! Mr. Dog pushed the lid down. Nice, he thought. Granny's soup. Granny cried, help, help, help! Oh, just in time, they're getting close to the door. Just then, the door burst open with a loud gyoma, gyoma, shuka, shuka, katak, katak. When Mr. Dog saw Kakamotobi, the boogeyman, and his gang, he got a terrible fright. That bad dog slipped and tripped over his miserable tail right out of the house, back to the wild side of town. There he goes. Whew. Look, they're all chasing him. Salma took off her mask and helped Granny climb out of the pot. Then they all sat down to eat watermelon and sip an ice-cold pink drink through candy-striped straws. The next day, Granny sent Salma to market to buy new clothes. Salma went straight there and back, and she never talked to strangers again. I like her new outfit. The end. Wow, that was a really cool version. So let's fill out our next tree in our Red Riding Hood forest. So remember, you start at the bottom where it says staple here, and you're going to fold it up just like this. So let's fold it back and forth. I liked this version because it kind of got changed. Mr. Dog dressed up like Salma instead of dressing up like the granny and kind of tricked the granny. And then instead of eating the granny, she jumped into a pot, which kind of reminds me of the Three Little Pigs when they captured the wolf in the pot. But luckily, Salma saved the day. Whew. All right, let's write down the title on the top flap. This one's called Pretty Salma. And it's by Nikki Daly. So I'm going to write that down. By Nikki Daly. And who is the main character in this one? That's right, Pretty Salma. And who is the villain? Yes, Mr. Dog. Remember, you can always pause the video to catch up. All right, what was the problem in this story? Yeah, there were lots of problems. I think the one I'm going to write about is that Dog tricked Salma and dressed up like her to trick Granny. So I'm going to write that down. Mr. Dog tricked Salma and dressed like her to trick Granny. Or I guess in this one they call her just Grandma. All right, so how do they solve the problem? Yeah, so Salma decided to dress up like the boogeyman. Let me remember the name of the boogeyman. It's Kakamatobi, to scare Mr. Dog. All right, so Salma dressed up like, uh-oh, that's a very tall I, like Kakamatobi, and scared away Mr. Dog, period. So the last thing I want you to write about is, why did you like this version? Whoa, I liked so many things about this version. I liked how the author Nikki kind of changed it a bit so that Mr. Dog dressed up like Salma. I also like how they included Anansi in this version, which we have read earlier this year. So that's a really cool text-to-text connection. What else did I like? I liked that the grandma used the song to tell whether or not it was actually Salma. That was very clever how the song was used in the story. Yeah, so there's lots of things I liked about that. So let's see. I liked this version because, so write that sentence starter and finish the sentence yourself. I like this version because the author included the Anansi story. I also liked that Salma scared Mr. Dog. I thought that was very clever. All right, I wonder why you like this version. So when you're done writing your reason, you're going to fold up your tree and color the top flap where it's the title brown. And we're going to make the next tree in our Red Riding Hood forest. There we go. Okay, so let's bring over our forest. So now we're going to be doing one in the middle of our forest like this, because then at the bottom we're going to be doing two more on the side. So this one is going to go between these two trees. So I'm going to slide this up and get my stapler. Oh, I might have to go on this side. There we go. Staple right where the arrow is. And then we're going to make another tree top. So this one's going to have to be a little skinny to fit between the other two trees. So this should be plenty. Let's make sure it fits. Okay. Let's see. How do I want this one to look? Maybe I'll just make it a circle. That'd be cool. Like that. All right. This one might be harder to staple because there's a lot in the way. So I'm going to try my best to glue it. And when you're doing this kind of gluing, you really have to hold it down for a long time so that it sticks. Really press it down. And then we have our Pretty Salma story here to fold out, and then we fold it back in. All right, there you have it. All right, we'll be back tomorrow to read another version of Little Red Riding Hood. See you then. Bye.